Hey everyone, how's it going? After my experiences with Bloodborne, the mood for Soulslikes started to crawl back into the depths of my brain, and I decided to kick things off with Dark Souls 2. And not just Dark Souls 2, but the Bearer of the Curse Edition mod, which is a mod that adds some quality of life improvements to the gameplay, like, not tying iframes to adaptability, having a manual jump, so evolutionary by the way, faster animations, on top of parrying and riposting bosses, and much more. And if you have the lighting mod, it makes the game look even more gorgeous in my opinion. But in between that time, I had also decided to check out one particular game that I got wind of during my exploration of Soulslikes again, even if it meant lowering the polygonal count on the game itself. Well, we have Prison of Husks, a low poly take on the Souls formula that also tries to bring about its own gameplay style while returning to that same level of atmosphere and level design that was found in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1. And when you first look at it, you might think to yourself, so this is what Dark Souls might have been like if it was on the PS1. And that's a question I was asking myself while I was playing it. And the thing with Soulslikes nowadays is that not only are we getting higher quality releases than before, but we're even getting more experimental projects, as well as titles that go beyond just having the dark and depressing settings that Souls games are generally known for. Well, Prison of Husks still goes with the dark and depressing setting, but at the same time it pushes its limits based on the 5th gen era of gaming. And it's not the first time I've seen this either. We had the Bloodborne remake made by the same person who did Nightmare Cart, and while it's unfortunate that you can't get it on itch.io anymore, you can still obtain it through archive.org. I'll leave a link in the description for those that want to try it out. And for what it is, it's pretty damn cool and it's worth playing. Anyway, with Prison of Husks setting, as I already said, it seems to be going for a Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1 inspired approach. And when I started up the game and saw its low poly scenery, I was reminded of the Boletarian Palace from Demon Souls and the Undead Burg from Dark Souls 1. Now, I don't know if the whole game is going to be exactly like this from beginning to end with the, consistent color palette, but in the trailer, there seems to be other locales with a similar atmosphere, so it is possible that it may still go with the same tone, although I'm mixing some things up along the way. And so far, I'm really digging the whole vibe. I love how it takes more inspiration from the older Souls games and how the design of the levels so far incentivizes and rewards exploration, something that was a huge part of the Souls games early on. Prison of Husks, by its style, can only do so much visually, and yet it does a great job with a color palette that supports the game with some great atmosphere, and while at times it can look somewhat muddy with the textures, it still holds together when you begin getting into the gameplay part of it, which is another thing that shows promise. However, because of the PS1 inspired aesthetics, it also does have an effect on the fluidity of the combat and the movement, so if you're expecting buttery smooth Elden Ring like animations, then you're going to be disappointed. Soulslikes in general can be hit and miss in their execution of how good the combat feels, and I will admit that when I first started Prison of Husks, I was confused at how the game wanted me to actually engage in the combat. I would go for attacks and play more aggressively if I could, and then would immediately be hit due to fast recoveries, leading me to guarding or going for a perfect guard like a parry along with a follow-up attack. But once I got the hang of Prison of Husks combat, I would then realize that the combat is supposed to be taken a bit more slower and more methodical, waiting for tells and patterns, timing guards and dodges, going for safer hits while maintaining your stamina. At least that's what I've gauged the combat to be like anyways. But since this is a demo, the combat could be overhauled over time and later enemies and bosses could fundamentally change how you initially play it. I also noticed that you don't really have currency to worry about here, or levels for that matter. I don't know if a level progression system is planned for it, but given how you can do even more damage in the combat through adrenaline on top of combining items to add more oomph to your melee weapons, it may not even be needed. Parrying is a thing, and it does seem that the game wants you to do it more often since enemies have very fast recovery time. There are supposedly pistols in the game, but I didn't see one, even though it was said to have it on the Steam page. Although it may be planned for later, and again, it is a demo, so there is a lot under the hood that we haven't seen yet. With your character, you have 3 points of armor and a certain amount of health. You can take about 3 hits before you start taking health damage, and when your armor is gone, you're much more vulnerable than you are with it. You also have an adrenaline meter that increases through frequent attacking. And from what I remember, you do more damage with it, but you also take more damage. So it is like a monkey's paw situation that you need to be more mindful of if you decide to play more aggressively. The way I'm seeing it is that it's trying to emulate the approach to Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1's combat, where actions have a lot more weight to them, where positioning and timing matters more, and you're not just some dude on speed and steroids at the same time like you are in some of the other Souls-like games. But what it's also doing is incorporating its own unique approach to the intensity of the combat through the usage of its armor system, the adrenaline system that keeps aggressive players in check, while also giving players who can read and punish tells a bigger advantage in the fight. When you do enough attacks, you can stagger the opponent and go for a critical, and attacking and dishing damage can also help restore your armor. The combat in general is showing some promise. It has some neat weapons, the combining system is pretty neat, taking something from Resident Evil where you can make new items by combining two different items at once. The enemies aren't overly challenging, but will still force you to engage with all of the mechanics, which I like when a game does that. At the moment though, you just have the castle level, or the prison level so to speak, the 4 weapons that I managed to find, and 2 bosses. The end boss is a puppet-like enemy that can close the distance and flurry with combos, and towards the end, it wakes up 2 other versions of it that adds even more pressure to the fight. The other one is a secret boss that can only be accessed by finding a particular item, which you can get by killing the guards and obtaining their keys, and then opening this cell to kill this enemy here. Just make sure that you open this cell, because the keys are finite, and if you open the wrong doors, you miss your chance and you'll have to start all over. For those that want to make the bosses easier, use Adrenaline Pellet and Flame Imprint on the twin blades to make for a very easy boss fight. Now, I'm sure that there'll be cheese strats and exploits that will undoubtedly be present in the final release, but I think the biggest strength of Prison of Husks lies more in its level design and its exploration, on top of the melancholic atmosphere that enhances it all. You see, with Soulslikes these days, you have the types that seem to be more combat-oriented, where the highlights are the combat and the boss fights. Then you have the other type of Soulslikes, where it's more about the setting, the lore, and the slower method towards exploration, as well as uncovering parts of the world. And I feel like Prison of Husks is going for the latter, because the combat, while it's still engaging, is never going to feel as fluid or as smooth as other Soulslikes that have a much bigger focus towards combat and boss fights, and also other Soulslikes that have high production values, where things feel a lot smoother and things look a lot better visually, at least if you prefer the high poly side of things. And this isn't because the game can't meet those production values, but by its mere 5th gen inspired design and its aesthetics. And that's not to say that 5th gen inspired games can't feel smooth or fluid to play. Pseudo Regalia is a great example of a 5th gen inspired game that feels really good to move in. Ultra Kill is another example that has that low poly aesthetic, and yet it feels great to play. But Prison of Husks is a different beast, of course, where everything is slower and is more methodical, where you need to take your time and absorb your surroundings without rushing headfirst into danger. And as for the story part of it, there isn't much to say about it other than that you're in a painted world of sorts, and your character is seeking their beloved. At least that's the gist of it. But beyond that, I can't really tell you anything else until the game is completed. And so far, the demo has been a pretty fun experience that seems to understand what really made Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1 special, where it wasn't always about the combat or its bosses, but the dense and complex level design filled with interesting secrets and lore to uncover that made for an interesting story to experience overall. And those that want a more Demon Souls or Dark Souls 1 oriented experience should absolutely keep their eyes on Prison of Husks. And those that prefer the mechanical side of the games may still find a unique experience here, but will also have to temper their expectations. Either way, I'm actually really keen for Prison of Husks, and its older style approach makes me appreciate the fact that some people still understand what made the Souls games special in the first place, that we get to enjoy different flavors of it too. Whether it's high poly, anime, or low poly 5th gen nostalgia wrapped in a modern operating system, it's a really promising demo, and I just hope that the rest of the game lives up to it. Thanks for watching.